Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from David Nail, titled I'm a Fire. You know, I feel like releasing this particular review so close to that of the Eli Young Band's most recent album really makes my job that much harder, because in the danger of repeating myself, I never felt I got the full picture about David Nail by listening to the songs that he sent to radio. Like the Eli Young Band, he debuted in the mainstream near the end of the 2000s, and he's had a steady stream of modest hits on the country charts. Like the Eli Young Band, he's got a slew of songwriting credits, but most of his albums have been defined by the Nashville songwriting machine throwing songs his way. But unlike the Eli Young Band, every impression that I got regarding David Nail from his singles was almost universally negative. I don't know if it was his too polished instrumentation, his voice that had a bit of presence but didn't quite have the charm or raw passion, or the fact that his lyrics towed the line between condescending dickishness and unwittingly painting him as an asshole, but look, none of it worked for me whatsoever. I think part of the problem is that his singles were mostly breakup songs and were often instigated by his actions within the songs, and thus I had very little sympathy for his romantic intent on songs like Let It Rain. I'm sorry, you're not gonna let me feel anything but disgust from your cheating, David Nail. And when I heard the opening single from his new album, Whatever She's Got, I was immediately steeling myself for the worst. That's why I haven't covered this album until now. That song was the sort of bro country love song that I always find a little bit repulsive. A song about some capricious girl that David Nail wants to screw, and what's worse is that the description of this girl was pretty far from flattering, and David Nail, with his utmost sincerity, he doesn't really come across much better. But then I reminded myself that David Nail is usually better than his singles, and despite some deep misgivings on my part, I decided to check out the album. Besides, there were some good songwriters and collaborators on this particular record, so it couldn't be that bad, right? Well, I can say this. The title of I'm a Fire by David Nail is a complete misnomer, because I would be lying if I said that there is anything close to real fire on this record. Instead, we got the kind of album that I just hate reviewing. A mellow slice of pop country that trades on romantic sentiments rather than good melodies, interesting lyrics, good production, or indeed anything that would require David Nail to exert himself as a performer besides the medium. In other words, this album is impressively mediocre, with some low points that really annoyed me, but otherwise, just not an album that I can get worked up about for all that long at all. Now, look, don't get me wrong, I get the feeling that at some points this album, it could have worked. The instrumentation, for one, it's not bad. Sure, there's more obvious electronic production than there should be, and there's a couple of bad guitar tonal choices, but overall, there's some decent dramatic swell, and there's some potent guitar work on this record, and there's honestly some pretty solid textured percussion that I did like. And where I feel the instrumentation did stumble were in the crescendos and the melodic flow. There's a lot of build up and there's a lot of slow burn, but the payoff always felt muted to me when the payoff was there at all, and I get the feeling that might have been part of the point. This record wasn't looking to explode with bombast, and while I feel that some of the rougher guitars would be a better fit for that particular direction, I don't mind artists going for a more subtle approach, which I think David Nail was trying to do here. But if we take that approach in mind, we immediately run into problems with David Nail's vocal performance, and while he's a technically proficient singer with some stage presence, he's not exactly a distinctive personality. His vocals are very polished and clean and technically sound, but when supplemented with the fact that he never really goes for broke or pushes himself emotionally on this album, he comes across as very calculated and methodical, and not in a good way. And it really lessens his presence on this album, and it really doesn't help him stand out, especially when compared to his frequent female backing vocals and his collaborators, which include Little Big Town and Ling Ann Womack, both of which have more vocal presence and texture than he does, which can mean that he sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. But you know what? I'll give him this. His more muted delivery, it's mostly consistent with the instrumentation, which places the majority of the emotional weight. It places it all on the lyrical content. And that's where I'm a Fire by David Nail just trips all over itself, and not because the lyrics technically are all that bad, but because they really don't stand out in the way that they should, especially in terms of deep deeper subtext and nuance, because mostly we don't get that at all. Outside of a cover of the modern country standard Galveston, which is pretty good, I like the song, this album really does not impress me lyrically, almost entirely because the framing of the songs is so off-kilter with respect to the lyrical content. Now, for example, take the second track, Broke My Heart, which honestly doesn't have that well written of a chorus, but forget that for a second, because it falls into the picking up girls mode. Except at this time, the song is talking about an ex that David Nail clearly isn't over, and he wants to hook up with her. In fact, it hammers on that point with a chorus with the lines, "Even if you never broke my heart, I'd still be begging you to tear it apart." But the problem is, since David Nail has so little emotional range, he delivers the song with that sort of sincerity that would be kind of endearing in a different track, a more love-struck track, that one with a girl who would actually be willing to go back with him. But here it just comes across as really jarring in comparison with the lyrical content. And the frustrating thing is that this keeps happening. Kiss You Tonight is playing in the same mold as Broke My Heart with regards to an ex, and he's convinced that she'll come back to him if she just manages to kiss her tonight. That's awfully presumptuous, isn't it? And then there's The Secret that hits the motherlode of bad framing and songwriting. Now, to break the song down, David Nail cheated with a girl, she got pregnant and went back to her husband. And much later on, she dies, and David Nail is informed about this when he's working at a bar with a different town. So he goes back for the funeral, and then he confronts the grieving husband, and all the while wondering who'd she miss more, David Nail or her spouse, and how someday David Nail will find peace with his own feelings with her. The self-absorption in this song is mind-bogglingly, and yet it's all framed that it's some special romantic secret between David Nail and this girl who didn't choose him, and who he hasn't seen for years because he skipped town. He probably doesn't even know the child in the situation. Forget the husband, who probably wasn't happy to see a man he might not know confess deep feelings for his dead wife, or the child who's now without a mother and probably doesn't know his real father, probably has no idea the current father isn't the real father. But nope, David Nail doesn't even think about that. He just has to reminisce on what might have been, and he has none of the effective emotional range to sell that complicated grief, providing the songwriting worked at all, and it doesn't. Now, to be fair to the guy, there are some simpler songs on this record where his brand of earnestness and his limited range, it can work reasonably well. Brand New Day, the title track with the little big town collaboration, When They're Gone, these are decent enough songs. And the Brandy Clark, Shane McAnally written track, Burn in Bed, you know what, it has some weight in terms of a slow burn love song, but Nail is just such an inert presence behind the microphone that he doesn't manage to sell those subtler emotions that's required to make those songs have real weight and impact. That's the big problem with this album. It's trying to be a softer, more restrained record that can hit those smaller emotional beats. It relies on that growing presence and that David Nail is an endearing personality, but he just does not have the presence, charisma, or emotional range to pull these songs off, even if they are well written, and sometimes they're not. And since he's continuously saddled with a load of breakup songs that require a lot more finesse in his delivery, and certainly not a great fit for his brand of sincerity, this album continuously stumbles. And what's worse, and what's about for all of this album's problems, I'm a Fire by David Nail just isn't nearly memorable or interesting enough to have any real staying power in my memory, and that's the real frustrating part. It honestly sounds just like another interchangeable modern country album, only distinctive because of how poor of a fit David Nail is for this sort of material. So in my opinion, I gotta be honest, 5 out of 10, and only worth your time if you're still a fan of this guy. Otherwise, skip this album. It's just not worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming up that you'd like me to take a look at, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than grateful to hear about it. So until then, see you next time.